The clinking of spoons was the only sound between them. That January morning, coffee percolated on the wood stove, the smell of it mixing with smoke and the cold that leaked through the kitchen windows despite the fire burning since 4. Frost flowers bloomed across the glass. Outside, 18 below. Inside, maybe 55 if you stood close enough to the stove. Tommy sat swinging his legs, syrup on his cheek, lost in his cereal bowl. 7 years old, still believed the world made sense. "Mom said the baby's for Jake," he said, voice bright as Sunday morning. Roy's hand stopped mid-stir. The spoon made one slow circle in his mug before going still. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to hurt. Linda's orange juice glass trembled. Her face went the color of old snow. "Ethan," she whispered. "What?" "You told Aunt Kelly on the phone," Tommy said, confused now, looking between them. "I heard you." Roy set his spoon down, checked through the kitchen window. Headlights coming up the ranch road, cutting through the dark. Jake's new F-250, $65,000 of truck on a foreman's salary. 7 o'clock sharp. Same as every morning. Roy heard the diesel shut off, heard boots on frozen gravel, heard Jake whistling something cheerful, that new Carhartt jacket rustling as he walked toward the house. "Morning, boss." The voice came through the door before the knock. Roy stood at the sink, back straight, jaw welded shut. Behind him on the wall hung his grandfather's branding iron, 60 years of Caldwell smoke still stained into the metal. Jake didn't know Roy knew. That gave Roy exactly one advantage. Roy opened the door. Jake stood there grinning, breath clouding in the cold, that expensive cologne cutting through the smell of diesel and frozen earth. His boots were new, no scuffs, the kind of boots a man wore when he wanted to look like a rancher without doing the work. "Coffee's on," Roy said. Jake stomped his feet on the porch, more for show than need. "Appreciate it, boss. Cold enough to freeze the balls off a pool table out there." Roy poured 2 mugs. His hand didn't shake. Behind him, Linda scraped her chair back and left the room without a word. Tommy kept eating, oblivious to the war that had just started with one innocent sentence. "Linda feeling all right?" Jake asked, settling into a chair like he owned it. Looked a little pale. "She's fine." "Good, good." Jake wrapped both hands around the mug. His fingers were smooth. No calluses. "Wanted to talk about those fence repairs up in the north pasture. Thinking we should get to it before the next storm hits." Roy nodded, sipped his coffee. The taste was bitter, but it gave him something to do besides look at Jake's face. "Also been thinking," Jake continued, leaning back. "May's coming up faster than you'd think. Should probably sit down and go over those partnership details. Make sure we're both on the same page when things activate." The clock ticked. The wood stove crackled. Tommy's spoon scraped his bowl. "May's a ways off," Roy said quietly. 4 months, Jake smiled. "But you know how spring gets busy. Branding, calving, all that. Figure we should get ahead of it." Roy set his mug down, looked Jake square in the eye. "You ever actually brand a calf, Jake?" Something flickered across Jake's face. Gone quick. "Done my share. Why?" "Just asking." Roy stood. "Better get to those fences. Daylight's burning." Jake rose, still smiling. "Yes, sir, boss. I'll get the boys on it." He left whistling, the same cheerful tune. The door clicked shut, and Roy stood there listening to the diesel fire up, watching the red taillights disappear toward the barn. Linda came back into the kitchen. Her eyes were red. "Roy, not now." He grabbed his coat from the hook. The canvas was stiff with cold. "I've got work." He walked out into air sharp enough to cut. The sun was just thinking about rising, painting the eastern sky the color of a promise nobody intended to keep. His breath fogged. Ice crystals had formed in his beard overnight. The truck door handle burned his palm through his glove when he yanked it open. Midnight found him in the den. The house was quiet, except for the furnace rumbling in the basement and his own breathing. Partnership papers spread across the desk, same papers he'd signed 6 months ago when he'd trusted Jake with a handshake and a future. He read slow. His father had been a better rancher than a reader, and Roy had inherited both the land and the habit of moving careful through words he didn't quite trust. Page 3, Standard Partnership Terms. Page 7, Profit Sharing, 60-40 until full transition. Page 11. Roy's reading glasses fogged from his breath. He wiped them, read it again. Successor must demonstrate ranch management competence to community satisfaction per traditional spring branding protocols. May 15th, activation date. Failure to demonstrate results in partnership nullification. He sat back. The leather chair creaked. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the dark, cattle shifted in the barn, their weight settling into frozen ground. May 15th, 18 weeks. The clause was buried like a bone in tall grass. Roy had never made it to page 11 when he'd signed. He'd trusted the handshake more than the paper, trusted that a man who looked you in the eye and called you boss meant it. He thought about the phone in his pocket. The lawyer's number saved from when they'd drawn up his will, but lawyers cost money and time, and asking meant admitting he'd been a fool. Roy folded the papers, slid them into the desk drawer. His hands were steady, but his chest felt carved out. Fire Jake now. The lawsuit could drag for years. Legal fees would bleed the ranch dry before spring. Keep Jake, let May 15th come, and Roy would be working his own land as a guest. Unless. His eyes went to the window, past the frost, past the dark, to where the barn sat quiet. Spring branding, traditional protocols, community satisfaction. 18 weeks until May, 18 weeks until everyone would see what Jake really was. Roy turned off the light, sat in the dark. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 1 in the morning, and he wondered how long a man could hold his silence before it killed him or saved him. Saturday morning, Miller's auction barn smelled like sawdust and manure and 50 years of cattle sales. The coffee shop attached to the arena was full by 8, ranchers in for the weekly livestock auction and the gossip that mattered more than prices. Roy pushed through the door. The bell jingled. Conversation stopped like someone had cut a wire. Jim Hendricks looked up from his booth, fork halfway to his mouth, kept looking, didn't nod, didn't speak, just stared until his wife elbowed him and he went back to his eggs. Roy walked to the counter, boots on linoleum, too loud. Miller stood behind the register, old enough to remember Roy's grandfather, face carved from the same hard country that grew the ranch. Coffee? Black, Roy said. Miller poured, slid the mug across. How you holding up, Roy? Fine. Heard things are... Miller stopped, shook his head. Cream's on the table if you change your mind. Roy took his coffee to an empty booth. The vinyl seat cracked when he sat. Around him, voices started up again. Careful, quiet, the kind of talk that stops when you turn your head. He was halfway through the cup when the bell jingled again. Jake walked in, that new jacket unzipped despite the cold outside, saw Roy, grinned like they were old friends meeting by accident. Boss, didn't know you were coming today. He walked over, slid into the booth across from Roy without being asked. Mind if I join you? Every eye in the place watched, waiting. Free country, Roy said. Jake ordered pancakes, talked about the weather, about a tractor that needed a part, about how the hands were shaping up this season. Normal conversation, the kind foremen have with their bosses over Saturday breakfast. But everyone was listening. Everyone saw how Roy's jaw worked, how his coffee sat untouched, how he looked at Jake the way you look at a coyote in the hen house after it's already killed half your birds. When Jake finally left, whistling his way to the auction arena, Jim Hendricks came over, stood by the booth, hat in his hands. Roy, he said, everything okay at home? Why wouldn't it be? Jim's weathered face creased. Just asking, if you need anything. I don't. Jim nodded, put his hat back on, walked away. But his pity stayed behind, thick as the bacon grease smell coming from the kitchen. Roy left money on the table, walked out past faces that couldn't quite meet his eyes. The cold air felt clean after the weight of that room. Monday afternoon, he sat in a bank office that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Marla Chen had papers spread across the desk between them. She was 45, sharp-eyed, her father an immigrant rancher who'd lost his place to predatory lending 30 years back. Your grandfather gave my father his first cattle loan, she'd said when Roy called. When no bank would touch him, this one's free. Now she pointed to an invoice. Equipment maintenance, February of last year, $12,000. Roy leaned forward. I remember that. Tractor overhaul. Here's the receipt from the actual shop. She slid another paper across. $4,200. The rest? She tapped the invoice. Disappeared. Roy's chest tightened. How much total? I've found 18 months of discrepancies. Her pen moved down the column. Equipment that was ordered but never delivered. Fuel charges to suppliers that don't exist. Maintenance invoices inflated by half. 47,000, give or take. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside the office, someone's printer whirred. 47,000, Roy repeated. The number sat in his mouth like broken glass. It matches his timeline. Marla pulled out another sheet. He started working for you March 2 years ago. The discrepancies begin that June. And look, she circled a date. The truck purchase. Last November. The down payment matches this equipment invoice to the dollar. Roy stared at Jake's signature on the bottom of each paper. Confident, flowing, the signature of a man who thought he'd never get caught. "Can I prove it?" he asked. "In court? Eventually. But Roy," Marla's voice softened, "that'll take time. And lawyers." Roy pulled out his phone, called the lawyer who'd drawn up the partnership, put it on speaker. The lawyer's voice came through tinny. "Fire him. He'll sue for wrongful termination. With a pending partnership agreement, he's got a case. You could be in court for 2-3 years. Legal fees would, I know what they'd do," Roy cut in. He'd seen men lose ranches to lawyers faster than to drought. "There's one option," the lawyer said, hesitated. "That competence clause on page 11. Traditional demonstration to community satisfaction. You'd have to prove publicly he can't do the job." "Spring branding," Roy said. "That would fit the traditional protocol, yes. But Roy, if you try and fail—" "I know." Roy ended the call, sat in the hum of fluorescent lights and someone else's heating system. His hands rested flat on the desk, calloused palms on smooth laminate. Marla gathered the papers. "What are you going to do?" Roy stood. The chair scraped linoleum. Through the window, snow was starting again, soft flakes that would turn to ice by nightfall. "Wait for spring," he said, "and let him think he's already won." Outside, the wind had picked up. He walked to his truck with papers burning in his coat pocket, evidence of theft wrapped in legal impossibility. "Fire Jake, lose the ranch to lawyers. Keep Jake, watch him steal it legal," the lawyer's voice echoed, "unless you can prove incompetence publicly." Roy started the engine. 18 weeks until May, 18 weeks until spring branding, 18 weeks to watch Jake call him boss every morning while dismantling 3 generations of work. He pulled out of the parking lot. The bank's sign disappeared in his mirror. Ahead, the road home stretched white and empty, the same road his grandfather had driven 70 years ago, when land was still something you earned with sweat instead of lawyers and buried clauses. 5 o'clock the next morning, Roy was checking fence posts in the north pasture when he heard the truck. Old diesel rattle, the kind that comes from an engine that's been running since Carter was president. Headlights cut through the dark. Clay Briggs climbed out carrying a thermos. 68 years old, built from the same hard dirt that grew the Caldwell Ranch. He'd been Roy's father's business partner for 30 years, back when partnerships meant something besides paper. "Thought you could use company," Clay said. Roy nodded. They walked the fence line together, breath fogging, boots crunching on frozen ground. The silence stretched 20 minutes. Clay poured coffee into 2 tin cups. The steam rose between them. "Your daddy and I built half this county," Clay finally said. His voice was quiet, factual. Sweat and handshakes and trusting a man's word mattered more than what lawyers wrote down. Roy sipped. The coffee was hot enough to burn, but he welcomed it. "I'm not watching some smooth-talking coyote take what your granddad broke his back clearing." Clay looked at Roy. "What do you need?" The words caught in Roy's throat. Asking for help felt like admitting he'd failed, that he'd been fool enough to trust Jake's smile and miss what was happening in his own house, his own books, his own marriage. "Got a name," Roy said finally. "Forensic accountant, but I need—" "Marla Chen. Already called her." Clay pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket. "Her daddy was that immigrant rancher, the one your granddad gave a loan to when the banks wouldn't touch him. She said she owes the Caldwells. Works evenings if you need it quiet." Roy took the paper. The ink was smudged from Clay's rough fingers. "One more thing," Clay said. He dumped the last of his coffee onto frozen grass. "Jake's been borrowing my tools, ropes, branding equipment, even asked for my calf table last week. Never seen a foreman who doesn't own his own gear." Roy filed that away, turned it over in his mind like a stone with sharp edges. "Men like that," Clay continued, "they don't just want one thing, they want it all, and they'll smile at you while they take it." He gripped Roy's shoulder. "But they always make mistakes. You just gotta be patient enough to see them." The sun was starting to think about rising. The eastern sky had gone from black to deep blue, that color that comes before light makes promises it might not keep. "Spring branding," Roy said. "May 10th. Clay's weathered face creased into something that wasn't quite a smile. 18 weeks. That's enough time for a man to show what he really is." After Clay left, Roy stood in the cold watching the sun come up. For the first time since Tommy's words at breakfast, something in his chest loosened. Not hope exactly, but not drowning either. 2 days later, Sheriff Dutch Reardon showed up at the ranch around noon. He'd been Roy's friend since grade school, served in Vietnam with Roy's cousin, wore his 64 years in the lines around his eyes and the way he moved. Careful, like a man who'd seen what happened when you rushed into things. Dutch didn't call ahead, just pulled up in his cruiser and climbed out, uniform crisp despite the mud season starting to set in. The temperature had climbed to 35. Ice was melting. Water dripped from the barn roof. "Routine check," Dutch said loud enough for Jake to hear from where he stood by the equipment shed, making sure everyone's got their ranch permits current. Roy played along. "Everything's in order." They walked through the barn. Dutch looked at insurance paperwork, fire extinguishers, the equipment logs that Jake was supposed to maintain. He took his time, asked questions, wrote things down in a little notebook. Jake appeared in the barn door. "Something wrong, Sheriff?" Dutch looked up slow. "Just doing my job. You the foreman?" "Jake Mercer." He stuck out his hand. Dutch looked at it, didn't shake. "How long you been working here?" "Coming up on 2 years." "That right." Dutch made a note. "You keep maintenance logs on the equipment?" "Yes, sir." "Mind if I see them?" Something crossed Jake's face, quick as a bird's shadow. "They're in the office. I can grab them." "I'll wait." Dutch leaned against a stall, crossed his arms. His badge caught the dim barn light. Jake walked away. His confident stride had turned careful. "He's nervous," Roy said quietly. "Should be." Dutch's voice was flat. "Ran his name through the system this morning. Nothing criminal, but he's moved around a lot. Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon. Never stays more than 2 years anywhere." "Pattern," Roy said. "Pattern." Dutch straightened when Jake came back with a binder. Flipped through it slow. "These maintenance logs look pretty sparse." We've been busy." "I bet." Dutch closed the binder, handed it back. "Mr. Mercer, you got any certifications? Brand inspection, livestock handling, anything official?" Jake's jaw worked. "I've got experience." "That's not what I asked." The silence stretched. Water dripped from the roof. A cow lowed from the pasture. "No official certifications," Jake finally said. Dutch nodded, made another note, looked at Roy. "Paperwork checks out. You have a good day now." He tipped his hat, started toward his cruiser, stopped, turned back. "Oh, Mr. Mercer, stay available. Might have more questions down the road." Jake stood there as the cruiser pulled away, that expensive cologne mixing with the smell of hay and cattle. His hands were in his pockets. His shoulders had lost some of their swagger. Roy walked past him without a word, went into the barn office, sat down, allowed himself the smallest exhale. Jake was nervous. First crack in that confident smile. Roy pulled out his phone. Texted Clay. He rattled. The response came quick. "Good. 16 weeks left. Let him worry." Outside, Jake's truck started up, drove toward the foreman's cabin, didn't whistle, didn't wave. Roy looked at the maintenance logs Jake had left on the desk, flipped through them. Half the pages were blank. The ones that weren't had Jake's signature but no details, no dates that made sense, no actual record of work done. Clay's words echoed. They always make mistakes. Jake had just made his first one where it mattered, in front of a witness with a badge. February brought a thaw that felt like betrayal. The temperature climbed into the 40s. Ice became slush. The ranch turned to mud that sucked at boots and made every step heavy. Jake started giving orders. "Roy said to move the heifers to the east pasture," he told the younger hands. "Roy wants the feed delivered Tuesday instead of Monday." "Always," Roy said, like he and Roy had discussed it, like they were partners already. Roy heard it from the barn, walked out to see Jake standing with 3 ranch hands, pointing toward the north fields, talking with the confidence of a man who owned the place. "Jake," Roy called, his voice cut through the morning. "A word!" Jake jogged over, still smiling. "What's up, boss?" "Did I say to move those heifers?" Did I say it?" Jake's smile flickered. "No, but I figured with the weather." "You figured." Roy kept his voice level. Quiet. The kind of quiet that makes men nervous. "When I want something done, I'll say it myself. Clear? Crystal." Jake's hands went into his pockets. "Just trying to help." "Help by doing what you're told." Jake nodded, walked away. But his shoulders were stiff. His stride wasn't as loose as before. That afternoon, Roy got an email. The bank wanted to schedule a meeting about the ranch's upcoming partnership transition and succession planning. 3 days out, Wednesday at 2, Roy hadn't scheduled it. Called the bank. "Oh, Mr. Mercer set it up," the manager said. "We thought it would be good to get everyone on the same page before spring gets busy." "I see," Roy said. "I'll be there." He hung up, sat in the barn office, staring at nothing. The walls felt closer than they had that morning. Jake was positioning himself, making moves, acting like the partnership was already active, like May 15th was a formality instead of a judgment day. Roy's phone buzzed. Clay. Heard Jake's been telling folks at Miller's you two are transitioning the operation. Thought you should know. Roy typed back, noted, but his hands were shaking. Valentine's Day came cold and wet. Rain instead of snow, the worst kind, freezing on contact, turning the world into a skating rink. The tin roof on the barn played a metallic drumbeat all afternoon. Linda made dinner, pot roast, mashed potatoes, the meal she used to make when they were young and money was tight but hope was cheap. She set the table with the good plates, lit candles. "I thought we could talk," she said when Roy came in from the barn. Her voice was small, careful. "Just us." Tommy was at a friend's house for the night. The house felt too quiet without him. Roy washed his hands at the sink. The smell of pot roast filled the kitchen, but his stomach was clenched tight. They ate in silence at first. Linda picked at her food, kept glancing at Roy, finally set her fork down. "I know things have been difficult," she said. Roy cut his meat, said nothing. "I made a mistake," her voice broke. "With Jake. But it's over. I ended it." Roy looked up. Her eyes were wet. Her hands twisted a napkin in her lap. "When?" he asked. "Last week. I told him we couldn't, that I wanted to save our marriage." "That's real noble of you." "Roy, please." A tear ran down her cheek. "I'm trying. Can we wait until after branding to really talk about this? I don't want the whole county gossiping during busy season." He set his knife down, studied her face. The candlelight made her look younger, made him remember when they'd been 20 and stupid and convinced love was enough. "Why after branding?" he asked quietly. She blinked. "What?" "You said after branding. Why that specific?" "I just meant, spring is always crazy, calving and branding and May 15th. Her face went still. "I don't." "That's when the partnership activates. That's why you want to wait. You're not being fair." Roy stood. His chair scraped the floor. "I'm going to check the barn. It's pouring." "I know." He grabbed his coat, canvas stiff with cold and rain, walked out into weather that matched his insides, frozen and mean and coming down too hard. The barn was warm. Cattle shifted in their stalls. The smell of hay and animal heat was better than Linda's perfume. Roy stood in the dark, letting rain hammer the roof. He didn't go back to the house until past midnight. Linda's car was still there. The lights were off except the one over the kitchen sink she always left burning. He took his boots off on the porch, walked quiet through the house, knew he shouldn't, knew it would hurt, did it anyway. Their bedroom door was half open. Linda asleep, her phone on the nightstand, charging. Roy picked it up, knew her password, their anniversary, opened her messages, nothing from Jake in the recent list. She'd deleted them, but the photo gallery. He scrolled, stopped, screenshots, text conversations with dates going back weeks. She'd saved them before deleting, insurance maybe, or sentimentality, or stupidity. Jake, can't wait until May, we'll finally be free. Linda, he still doesn't suspect anything. Jake, the partnership papers are solid. After branding, I'll be co-owner, then we both walk away. Linda, what if he fights it? Jake, with what? Legal fees would bankrupt him. He's stuck. Roy's hands didn't shake. His heart didn't race. Everything just went very cold and very clear. He scrolled further, found photos, ultrasound images sent between them, Linda's doctor appointments on Tuesdays, the ones Roy thought were for her thyroid. He put the phone back exactly where he'd found it, walked out. Down the hall past Tommy's empty room with its drawings of cowboys and cattle, past the living room where their wedding photo hung, 25 years of lies in a frame. The den was dark. Roy didn't turn on the light, just sat in his grandfather's chair and stared at nothing while rain beat the windows like it was trying to get in. Linda wasn't conflicted. She wasn't making mistakes. She was coordinating. They'd planned this. Jake would get the ranch through the partnership. Linda would get, what, freedom? A younger man? The satisfaction of leaving before Roy could leave her? The lawyer's voice echoed, 2, 3 years in court. Legal fees would bleed you dry. Roy pulled out the bottom desk drawer. His service pistol sat there in its case, untouched for years. He looked at it, thought about how easy it would be, how permanent. Then he thought about Tommy, about his drawing on the refrigerator, about his grandfather who'd cleared this land with a team of horses and never quit even when the drought of '58 killed half the herd. Roy closed the drawer, pulled out the partnership papers instead, read page 11 again. Demonstrate ranch management competence to community satisfaction per traditional spring branding protocols. Jake had never branded a calf in his life. Clay said he borrowed tools. The maintenance logs were fake. He delegated everything. But Roy needed proof everyone could see. Needed the whole county watching when Jake fumbled. Needed it, public and undeniable. He checked the calendar. 12 weeks until May 10th, traditional branding day. Roy pulled out his phone, sent an email to Jake with Clay and the 3 other neighboring ranchers CC'd. Jake, thinking it's time for you to step up, want you to lead the branding crew this year, run the whole operation start to finish. Good chance to show everyone what you can do. We'll make it a proper community event. Roy. He hit send, sat back. The clock ticked toward 2 in the morning. Rain had turned to sleet, tapping at the windows like fingernails. Linda thought she could wait him out until Jake secured the ranch. Jake thought he could smile and steal and the partnership papers would protect him. They'd made one mistake. They forgot that silence doesn't mean surrender. It just means a man is choosing his moment. March came in wet. The ice was gone, but mud took its place, thick and heavy, sucking at everything. The ranch smelled like thaw, earth and manure, and the rot of winter finally giving up. Roy was fixing a gate hinge when he heard Tommy inside the house. The boy had been quiet since Valentine's, quieter than a 7-year-old should be. Roy could hear Linda's voice too, trying to sound normal, trying to pretend the house wasn't held together with lies and countdown clocks. He walked in through the mudroom, boots by the door, coat on the hook. His hands still smelled like machine oil and rust. Tommy sat at the kitchen table with crayons and paper spread out. His tongue stuck out the corner of his mouth the way it did when he was concentrating. Linda stood at the stove making something that filled the house with the smell of onions and false domesticity. "What are you drawing, buddy?" Roy asked. Tommy looked up. "Our ranch. How it's going to be." Roy pulled out a chair, sat down beside his son. The drawing showed a house, a barn, stick-figure cattle, and a pasture. The sun in the corner was yellow and huge. 2 people stood by the fence, one tall, one small. "Who's that?" Roy pointed to the tall figure. "You." Tommy added more brown crayon to the fence. "And that's me." Roy looked at the picture, counted the figures again. "Where's Mom?" Tommy shrugged, kept coloring. "She's busy." The word hung there. Linda's spatula stopped scraping the pan. The kitchen got very quiet except for Tommy's crayon on paper. "What about Jake?" Roy asked. His voice was careful, gentle. "I thought he was going to help us this spring." "Jake said he'd teach me to brand." Tommy set down the brown crayon, picked up green for grass. "But he's always busy too, says later, says next time. But next time never comes." Roy's chest tightened. He watched his son color grass around the stick-figure cattle, watched him add a sun that took up half the sky, watched him draw a future that didn't include the people who'd tried to steal it. "You want to learn to brand?" Roy asked. Tommy's face lit up. "Can I?" "This spring, May, I'll teach you myself." "Really? Really?" Roy put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. The boy was small still, bony, but he'd grow, he'd learn. He'd be the 4th generation of Caldwells on this land if Roy could keep it. Tommy went back to drawing, added a dog they didn't have yet, added mountains in the distance that looked like blue triangles, added a fence that went on forever. "Dad," Tommy said without looking up, "can I be your partner instead of Jake?" Roy's throat closed. He cleared it, waited until he could speak without his voice breaking. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "You can." Linda turned off the stove, left the room. Roy heard their bedroom door close, heard her crying through the walls. Tommy kept drawing, adding more cows, more fence, more sky. Roy looked at that picture, at the future his son saw without even knowing why it looked that way, and something crystallized. He wasn't fighting for Linda anymore. Wasn't even fighting against Jake. He was fighting for the small boy with a crayon who still believed his father could fix anything. That afternoon, Roy's truck was full. Clay in the passenger seat, Sheriff Dutch in the back, Marla Chen following in her Honda. They met at the ranch, while Jake was in town picking up feed. Clay spread papers across the hood of Roy's truck. Invoices, receipts, bank statements, 18 months of theft laid out in the spring sun. "Pattern's clear," Marla said. She'd worked nights for 2 weeks, organizing everything. He inflated costs on every major purchase, skimmed the difference, $47,000 total, best estimate. "Can you prove intent?" Dutch asked. He was there unofficial, off-duty as a friend, but his eyes were sharp, cop eyes. He'd seen fraud before. "These." Marla pulled out a separate folder. Equipment that was supposedly purchased but never delivered. Maintenance that was supposedly done, but logs show nothing. He was careful, but not careful enough. Roy took the papers, evidence that would stand up in court eventually, but eventually wasn't good enough. The partnership would activate in 9 weeks. Court would take years. "The branding," Clay said. He leaned against the truck, arms crossed. "That's your play." He accepted the invitation? Dutch asked. Roy pulled out his phone, showed them Jake's response email. Happy to lead the crew, boss. About time you started trusting me with the big stuff. I'll make you proud. Clay snorted. Cocky son of a bitch. Good, Dutch said. Means he'll show up. Means he won't back out. I need witnesses, Roy said. The partnership papers say community satisfaction. That means people who matter. I'll be there, Clay said. Jim Hendricks, Bob Martinez, the Paulson brothers, Old Guard, will spread the word. Make it a proper community branding, like the old days. I can have 30 ranchers there, Dutch added. Men who know the difference between someone who's done the work and someone who's faking it. Roy nodded, looked out across his land. The pastures were greening, mud was drying. Spring was coming whether anyone was ready or not. What if he performs? Marla asked quietly. What if he manages to pull it off? He won't, Clay said flatly. Man doesn't own his own tools. Borrows my ropes every time. Asked me last week how to tie a Honda knot. He's been faking it for 2 years. But what if... He won't, Roy interrupted. His voice was certain. I've been branding calves since I was 8. My father taught me. His father taught him. Jake's been Google searching cattle handling techniques when he thinks nobody's looking. How do you know that? Dutch asked. Check the ranch computer browser history. Roy's face was grim. He cleared it, but not well enough. They stood in silence. Wind moved through grass that was starting to green. Birds were returning. Meadowlarks and redwings, their songs tentative, testing if spring was real this time. 9 weeks, Roy said. May 10th. We'll brand in the traditional way. Community event, everyone watches. Jake leads the crew, like I asked him to. And when he fails, Marla asked, the partnership clause says he has to demonstrate competence to community satisfaction. If 30 ranchers watch him fumble basic ranch work... Roy let the sentence hang. Partnership's void, Dutch finished. And we've got all this hard. He gestured to the papers for the fraud charges. He thought he was so smart, Clay said. He picked up an invoice, looked at Jake's signature, thought he could smile and steal, and nobody would notice. But the thing about ranch work is you can't fake it forever. Eventually someone hands you a rope and a branding iron, and the truth comes out. They packed up the papers. Marla took her copies. Dutch promised to have the fraud evidence ready for official filing the day after branding, wanted everything clean, by the book. As they were leaving, Clay stopped, turned back to Roy. Your granddad used to say something you probably don't remember. You were pretty small. What's that? The land knows who loves it and who's using it. Clay looked out across the Caldwell Ranch. May 10th, that land's going to speak through you, and everyone's going to hear it. After they left, Roy went back inside. Tommy's drawing was still on the table. 2 stick figures, no mom, no Jake, just father and son and cattle and a sun that took up half the sky. Roy folded it careful, put it in his shirt pocket, right over his heart. 9 weeks until May 10th, 9 weeks until spring branding, 9 weeks until the truth stopped being patient and started being public. April came slow. The mud was drying, but the morning still had frost. Rain instead of snow, cold and mean, drumming on the barn's tin roof like impatient fingers. The smell of wet earth and new grass fought with the last remnants of winter manure. Saturday at Miller's, Jake made his mistake. Roy was discussing cattle prices with Jim Hendricks when Jake walked over, coffee in hand, that confident swagger that came from thinking he'd already won. Actually, boss, Jake said, loud enough for half the coffee shop to hear, I think we should hold off on that sale. Market's going to climb in 2 weeks. We get better prices if we wait. The conversation around them stuttered. Men looked up from their eggs and bacon. Jim's eyebrows rose. Roy set his coffee down slow. That right? Yeah, I've been watching the futures. Trust me on this one. You're saying I'm wrong, Jake smiled. I'm saying I've got better data. No offense, but you've been doing things the same way for 30 years. Market's different now. Roy nodded, didn't argue, just looked at Jake until the smile started to slip. We'll talk about it later, Roy said quietly. But the damage was done. Jim waited until Jake left before leaning in. He always correct you like that? Getting bolder. Folks are noticing, Jim said. His voice dropped. Word around is he's been telling people he's taking over come May, acting like it's already done. Roy sipped his coffee, said nothing. You need anything, Jim continued. You let me know. Your granddad helped my family when we were about to lose our place in '72. I don't forget that. Appreciate it. That same afternoon, one of the younger ranch hands, a kid named Marcus, maybe 23, knocked on Roy's barn office door. "Mr. Caldwell, got a minute?" "Sure." Marcus shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I'm giving notice. 2 weeks." Roy leaned back. "Mind if I ask why?" "It's just—" Marcus looked at his boots. "Something's off here. The way Jake runs things, the way he talks about you when you're not around. It don't sit right." "What's he say?" "That you're old school, that you're holding the place back, that once he's partner everything's going to change." Marcus met Roy's eyes. "Sir, I've been ranching since I was 12. My dad taught me. And Jake, he don't know half what he pretends to know." "That's so." "Asked me last week how to tell if a heifer's ready to breed. That's first-year stuff, and he's supposed to be foreman?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't want to be here when whatever's happening finally happens." Roy stood, shook Marcus's hand. "I understand. You're a good hand. You need a reference. You call me." After Marcus left, Roy walked out to the pasture, stood at the fence, watching cattle graze. Spring grass was coming in green and fresh. The mountains in the distance still had snow on their peaks, but the valleys were warming. Jake was by the equipment shed, talking to the two remaining hands. Roy stayed back, watched. Jake was explaining something, using his hands a lot, looking confident. But when one of the hands pointed to a tractor and asked a question, Jake's expression changed. Uncertainty. He pulled out his phone, looked at it, put it back. "Let me check on that," Jake said. "I'll get back to you." Roy waited until the hands left. Then he walked to the ranch office, opened the computer, checked the browser history. Jake had cleared it again, but Roy had installed monitoring software 2 weeks ago. It saved everything. How to brand cattle without scarring best rope techniques for beginners. Cattle handling safety tips. What equipment do I need for branding? Roy sat back. The office smelled like old coffee and papers and the truth that comes when you stop pretending. His phone buzzed. "Clay, Jake just asked to borrow my calf table and shoot for branding day. Said his equipment's in the shop. Thought you should know." Roy typed back. "Add it to the list." Another text. This one from Dutch. "Confirmed with 30-plus ranchers for May 10th. Words spread. Everyone wants to see the new generation show what they've got." Jake's walking into a tribunal and doesn't know it. The next morning, cold rain falling, Roy was in the barn when Jake came in. His new jacket was soaked. His expensive boots were caked with mud that he hadn't bothered to scrape off. "Got a minute, wuss boss?" Jake's voice was different, less swagger, more careful. "Speak." "About branding day. I was thinking maybe we could do it low-key, just us and the hands, don't need to make it a whole production." Roy looked up from the feed inventory. "You said you wanted to step up, show what you can do." "I do, but I already sent invitations. Traditional community branding. Clay's coming, Jim Hendricks, the Paulsons, probably 30 folks total." Roy's face was neutral. "That a problem?" Jake's jaw worked. "No, no problem. Just thought. Good. May 10th. Dawn. Community's looking forward to it." Roy went back to his clipboard. "That all?" "Yeah, that's all." Jake left. Roy listened to his boots on the barn floor, slower than usual, less confident. Through the barn door, Roy watched Jake walk toward his cabin. The rain came down harder. Jake stopped halfway, stood there in it, like he was thinking about something he couldn't take back. Then he pulled out his phone, started typing fast, probably to Linda, probably saying he needed to practice, probably realizing he'd accepted an invitation to prove competence he didn't have in front of an audience that would know the difference. Clay's truck pulled up. He got out in the rain, didn't seem to notice or care. "He tried to back out?" Clay asked. "Almost. But he didn't." "No," Roy said. "He's too proud. Thinks he can fake it one more time." Clay smiled. Not friendly. More like a wolf showing teeth. 5 weeks. He's going to learn you can't Google your way through a branding when 30 ranchers are watching every move. The rain drummed on the barn roof. Spring was coming, ready or not, true or false. The land had a way of showing which was which. 2 in the morning, Roy sat alone in the barn. The cattle were quiet. Rain pattered on the tin roof, not frozen anymore, just cold and steady. Spring rain, the kind that said winter was finally done lying about leaving. He'd been sitting there for an hour, maybe 2. Time moved strange when you couldn't sleep and didn't want to think, but couldn't stop. The branding iron hung on the wall. His grandfather's. 60 years of Caldwell cattle marked with that iron. The handle was worn smooth where 3 generations of hands had gripped it. The metal was stained black from smoke and use and time. In 4 weeks, Roy would use it in front of 30 ranchers, would hand Jake a rope and watch him fumble, would let the whole county see what Jake really was, and the question that kept Roy awake. Was that justice or just cruelty? He'd been raised that you didn't humiliate a man public, that you handled problems private, that dignity mattered even when you were wronged. But Jake had stolen $47,000, was sleeping with Roy's wife, had positioned himself to take 3 generations of work through legal paperwork and smiles. Still, watching a man fail in front of his peers, wasn't that the kind of thing Roy had always despised? The kind of revenge that made you smaller? The barn door creaked. Roy's hand went to his side, old instinct, but it was just Pastor Webb, 70 years old, white hair wet from rain, carrying a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "Saw your light on," Webb said. He set the dish on the workbench. Didn't ask permission, didn't explain, just sat on a hay bale and looked at Roy. They sat in silence. 5 minutes, 10, the rain kept its rhythm. A cow shifted in her stall. The smell of hay and animal warmth filled the space between them. "You wrestling with something," Webb finally said. Not a question. Roy's jaw worked. Maybe. The branding. "How'd you—" "Whole county knows." Webb pulled out a thermos, poured 2 cups of something that smelled like coffee and cinnamon, handed one to Roy. "Question is whether you're wrestling with doing it or with doing it right." Roy sipped. The liquid was hot and sweet and tasted like his grandmother's kitchen. "Don't know anymore." "You think you're fixing to humiliate him?" "Aren't I?" Webb was quiet. Outside, the rain picked up. Water ran off the roof in streams. "Tell me something," Webb said. "If Jake was competent, if he could actually do the work, would the branding day prove anything?" "No." "So you're not humiliating him. You're just asking him to be what he claims to be." Webb set his cup down. "There's a difference between revenge and revelation. Revenge is hurting someone because they hurt you. Revelation is just removing the mask they put on themselves." Roy stared at the iron on the wall. The metal was dark, honest, showed every year it had been used. "He put himself in this position," Webb continued. "He took the job. He took the money. He took your trust. And now he's accepted the invitation to prove he earned any of it. That's not on you." "Still feels wrong," Webb smiled. "That's because you're a decent man. Decent men always question whether they're being cruel. It's the cruel ones who never ask." He stood, left the thermos. "That casserole's from Marla Chin's mother. She said your granddad gave her husband his start, said the Caldwells never asked for anything back. But now it's time to let folks pay what they owe." After Webb left, Roy sat with the cooling coffee. The rain was softer now. Through the barn door he could see the sky, still dark, but maybe less dark. The kind of almost light that comes before dawn decides whether it's coming or not. He thought about Tommy's drawing, about Jake's browser history, about Linda's text messages saying he still doesn't suspect. He wasn't humiliating Jake. He was just letting Jake stand in front of people who knew the difference between work and words. Roy stood, walked to the wall, took down his grandfather's iron. The metal was cold and heavy and real. He carried it to the workbench, found the oil, started working it into the handle, slow and careful the way his father had taught him. The next 3 days, Roy sent invitations, not emails, actual paper invitations, the old way. Hand-delivered to 30 ranchers, men who'd known his father and grandfather, men who understood that land was a trust and work was a language liars couldn't speak. Every one of them said yes. Clay showed up with his equipment, calf table, ropes, chutes, everything Jake had been planning to borrow laid out in the morning sun. "Figured we'd use proper gear," Clay said. "Not whatever Jake was going to rent last minute." Roy looked at the equipment. All of it worn but maintained, used by men who knew their trade, tools that had branded thousands of calves over decades. "He's going to use mine," Roy said. "The grandfather's iron, the one we've always used." "And Jake?" "He can use whatever he brings." Roy's voice was flat. "If he brings anything." 3 weeks now, 21 days. The grass was green, the calves were growing. Spring had arrived despite everyone's doubt. Roy oiled the branding iron one more time. Hung it above the barn door, where the sun would hit it come May 10th. Where everyone could see it. Where it would wait to separate truth from performance in front of witnesses who'd know which was which. In his cabin, Jake's new tools sat in their packaging. Roy had seen them through the window, still had price tags. Bought from a farm supply website 3 days ago. They were shiny, unused, the kind of tools a man buys when he's trying to look the part instead of live it. Roy's iron was black with smoke and history. You couldn't fake that kind of wear. You couldn't Google that kind of knowing. 3 weeks, spring rain washing away the last mud, the land greening, the truth getting ready to speak. May 10th came with a sky so blue it hurt. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of morning that reminds you why men ranch despite the cost. The smell of coffee and cattle mixed with spring grass and the smoke from Clay's truck as he pulled up first, headlights cutting through the last dark. By 6, 30 trucks lined the ranch road. Ranchers Roy's age and older, a few younger ones who'd heard about the traditional community branding and wanted to see if the old ways still worked. They gathered by the corrals, thermoses in hand, talking low. The sound of their voices mixed with cattle lowing and meadowlarks testing out the morning. Jim Hendricks stood with the Paulson brothers. Bob Martinez leaned against the fence rail. Dutch was there in jeans instead of his uniform, but everyone knew why he'd come. Clay had his equipment set up, calf table, chutes, everything clean and ready. Tommy stood beside Roy, wearing his grandfather's old work gloves cut down to fit small hands. His face was serious, excited. He didn't understand what was really happening, just that he got to help. "Where's Jake?" Clay asked. It was 6:15. "He'll be here," Roy said. At 6:20, Jake's F-250 pulled up. He climbed out wearing new gear, new Wranglers, new boots, new gloves still stiff from the packaging. His face was pale despite the sunrise painting everything gold. "Morning," he said. His voice didn't have its usual swagger. "Sorry I'm late." "You're not," Roy gestured to the gathered ranchers. "Everyone's here to watch you lead the crew, like you wanted." Jake looked at the 30 faces watching him, swallowed. "Right, yeah, let's get started." Clay brought the first calf into the chute. A heifer, maybe 3 months old, already getting wild. She kicked against the metal. The sound echoed across the morning. "She's ready," Clay said. "Need someone to rope her out." Jake picked up a rope, Roy's rope, the one he'd offered. The hemp was worn soft from decades of use. Jake shook out a loop, swung it twice, through. The loop landed 3 feet short. Jake pulled it back, tried again. This time the rope tangled. His hands fumbled with it. From the fence, someone coughed. Another man shifted his weight. "Take your time," Roy said quietly. Third attempt. The loop went over the calf's head, but Jake didn't pull tight fast enough. The heifer backed out of it, spooked now, kicking harder. "Here." Clay stepped in, roped her clean in one throw, and "Maybe you should handle the branding." Jake nodded. His face was red. He walked to where the branding iron sat in the fire pit. Roy's grandfather's iron glowing orange, ready. Jake's new iron beside it, heating slower. Clay wrestled the calf to the ground, held her steady. "She's yours." Jake grabbed his new iron. The handle wobbled in his grip. He approached the calf, hesitated, pressed the iron down. Too hard, too long. The calf bawled. The smell of burning hair filled the morning, but the brand was crooked, the pressure uneven. When Jake lifted the iron, the mark was a mess, burned in some places, barely marked in others. "You're going to have to redo that," Jim Hendricks said from the fence. His voice was flat, factual. Jake's hands shook. He pressed the iron down again, held it. The calf screamed. The brand was worse now, overlapped, burned too deep. You could see muscle under the hide. "That's enough," Roy said. "Let her up." Clay released the calf. She stumbled away, bawling, the ruined brand visible to everyone. The gathered ranchers said nothing, but their silence was louder than words. "Next one," Jake said. His voice cracked. The second calf was a bull, bigger, meaner. When they got him in the chute, he went crazy, bucking, slamming against the metal. Jake tried to rope him, failed 4 times. When he finally got a loop over the bull's head, the animal charged. Jake jumped back so fast he tripped, landed hard in the dirt. The bull broke free, ran through the corral, scattering ranch hands. Dutch and 2 others had to corner him, rope him proper, get him back under control. Jake stood up. His new jeans were covered in mud and manure. His face was white. His hands were shaking. "Maybe we should," he started. "Your iron's cold," Roy said. He pointed to the fire pit. "You forgot to keep it hot." Jake looked. His brand was barely warm now, useless. He'd been so focused on failing, he forgot the basics. Roy walked to the fire, picked up his grandfather's iron. The handle fit his palm like it was grown there. He nodded to Clay. They brought out the bull. Roy roped him first throw, clean, tight, the loop settling perfect. The bull tried to fight, but Roy knew how to read the animal, when to give slack, when to pull. He had the bull down in 30 seconds. The branding took 5 seconds. Roy pressed the iron down, felt the heat and pressure through his gloves, knew by weight and sound when it was done. When he lifted it, the Caldwell brand was perfect. Clean lines, proper depth, the mark of 3 generations of knowing. The gathered ranchers nodded. A few smiled. This was the work they knew. This was the standard. Roy did 6 more calves. Each one clean, each one quick, each one showing 50 years of mornings just like this one. Tommy watched every move, his eyes wide. By the 8th calf, Jake had stopped trying. He just stood there, his new equipment useless in his hands, watching Roy do in minutes what Jake couldn't do in an hour. When the last calf ran back to its mother, Roy hung the iron back on its hook, wiped his hands, looked at the 30 ranchers. "Anyone got questions about competence?" he asked. Silence. Then Jim Hendricks spoke up. "I've seen enough." "Me too," Bob Martinez said. One by one, the ranchers nodded. Clay pulled out a paper, the partnership clause, page 11. "Says here successor must demonstrate ranch management competence to community satisfaction. Anyone here satisfied?" 30 men shook their heads. "Partnership's void then," Clay said. He looked at Jake. "You want to contest that, we can go to court." "But these 30 men saw what they saw. You want that in a legal record?" Jake's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Roy, at the ranchers, at Tommy standing there in his grandfather's cut-down gloves. "I'll pack my things," Jake said quietly. Roy's phone buzzed. He pulled it out. Number he didn't recognize. Answered. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Thomas Reed, First Bank of Cedar Valley. I need to speak with you urgently." The man's voice was tight, nervous. "We had an incident this morning. Mr. Mercer attempted to authorize a significant equipment sale and land transfer using partnership paperwork. We flagged it as suspicious given the timing. I wanted to alert you before processing anything." Roy put it on speaker, let everyone hear. "What kind of transfer?" Dutch asked, stepping closer. "Sale of approximately $200,000 in ranch equipment, plus a request to transfer deed on the north 40 acres to his name. Said it was part of the partnership activation." The banker paused. "When we called for confirmation, Mr. Caldwell, you didn't answer, so we held everything." Roy looked at Jake. "You tried to sell my equipment this morning?" Jake's face went from white to gray. "That's not... I was just... fraud," Dutch said. His voice was cop-hard now. "Attempted theft, that's criminal." "We have documentation." Marla's voice came from behind them. She'd been standing quiet by her car. Now she walked forward with a folder. 18 months of inflated invoices, 47,000 in theft, pattern of embezzlement. She handed it to Dutch. "Everything you need." Jake looked around, at the ranchers watching him and at the evidence in Dutch's hands, at Roy standing calm and still like judgment made flesh. "I want a lawyer," Jake said. "You'll get one." Dutch pulled out his phone. "But right now, you're under investigation for fraud. Don't leave the county." Jake stumbled toward his truck. The gathered ranchers parted like water around a stone. Nobody helped him. Nobody spoke. They just watched him climb into that $65,000 truck, bought with stolen money, and drive away. After he left, Clay started packing up the equipment. The other ranchers drifted toward their trucks, talking quiet. A few shook Roy's hand. Jim Hendricks clapped him on the shoulder. "Your granddad would be proud," Jim said. Tommy tugged Roy's sleeve. "Dad, did we win?" Roy looked down at his son, at the drawing still in his pocket, at the future that was safe now. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "We won." By sunset, Jake's cabin was empty. Roy watched from the porch as the F-250 pulled away one last time, loaded with whatever fit. The new tools sat in a pile by the door, still had tags on some of them. Jake had left them behind like evidence he didn't want to carry. Dutch's car followed Jake's truck down the ranch road. Not arresting him yet, just making sure he knew someone was watching. The fraud charges would take time, paperwork and lawyers and court dates, but the partnership was done. 30 witnesses had seen what mattered. Roy sat on the porch steps with coffee gone cold. The sun was dropping behind the mountains, painting everything gold and purple. Spring birds called from the cottonwoods. The smell of new grass and cattle and distance filled the air. The front door opened. Linda stood there with a suitcase. She'd been quiet all day, hadn't come out for the branding, hadn't said a word when Jake left. "I called my sister," she said. Her voice was small, empty. "In Bozeman. I'm going to stay there for a while." Roy didn't turn around. "Okay. I'm sorry." The words broke. "For all of it, I don't know what I—" "You should go before it gets dark," Roy said. "Roads are still muddy in places." She stood there another minute, maybe waiting for him to ask her to stay, maybe hoping for anger or tears or something that said 30 years meant enough to fight for. But Roy just looked at the mountains and sipped cold coffee and let silence do what words couldn't. Her car started, drove away. He didn't watch, just listened to the sound fade until it was gone, and all that was left was spring evening and cattle settling for the night. Tommy came out later, when stars were starting. He sat beside Roy on the steps. Neither spoke for a while. "Is Mom coming back?" Tommy finally asked. "Don't know, buddy. Do you want her to?" Roy thought about that. About lies, and partnership papers, and breakfast revelations. About trust broken so completely you couldn't see where the pieces went. "I want you to be okay," Roy said. "That's what I want." Tommy leaned against him. 7 years old and already learning that grown-ups could fail you in ways that didn't make sense. That love wasn't always enough. That sometimes the people who were supposed to stay were the ones who left first. "We're still going to be okay, though, right?" Tommy asked. His voice was young, worried. Roy put his arm around his son. "Yeah, we will be." Saturday morning, Miller's auction barn. Roy walked in, and conversations didn't stop this time. Jim Hendricks waved him over. Bob Martinez bought him coffee. The Paulson brothers asked about his calves and meant it. Roy sat in a booth with his coffee and the newspaper and the normal weight of a normal morning. No pity, no careful words, just ranchers talking about weather and prices and the work that never ended. Clay slid into the booth across from him. "Heard Jake's lawyer is trying to negotiate. Wants to settle the fraud charges quietly." "What did Dutch say?" "Said 47,000 buys a lot of noise." Clay grinned. "Your call, though." Roy thought about it. About revenge versus resolution. About what his grandfather would do. "Let Dutch handle it proper," Roy said. "However the law works, I'm done with it." "Fair enough." Clay sipped his coffee. "Also, Tommy asked if he could come help with fence work next week. Told him to ask you first. He can come." "Good." Clay stood. "Your granddad would be proud, Roy. What you did, how you did it, standing there calm while everything burned around you. That takes a kind of strength most men don't have." After Clay left, Roy sat with his coffee and watched ranchers come and go. The auction started up in the arena, the auctioneer's rhythm like a heartbeat, familiar and steady, the smell of sawdust and livestock and coffee, the sound of men doing business the way it had been done for 100 years. This was community. This was what Jake had tried to steal and couldn't. The respect that came from work, not words, from showing up every morning for 30 years, from being your grandfather's grandson and meaning it. That afternoon, Roy and Tommy fixed fence in the north pasture. The wire was old, needed replacing. Tommy held the posts while Roy hammered. The sun was warm, the grass was green, mountains stood in the distance like they always had. "Dad?" Tommy asked. "Can I learn to use the branding iron? The real one?" "Grandfather's iron?" "Yeah." Roy set down the hammer, looked at his son, small still, but growing, learning, becoming. "Next spring," Roy said. "When you're 8, same age I was when my dad taught me." Tommy's face lit up. "Promise?" "Promise." They worked until the sun started dropping, then walked back to the house together, Tommy carrying tools too big for him but trying anyway. The ranch spread out around them, green and wide in theirs, earned, kept, passed down. That evening, Roy took his grandfather's photo from the drawer where he'd hidden it. The frame was dusty, but the glass was intact. Black and white image of a man who'd cleared this land with horses and sweat and never quit. Roy hung it in the barn, right above where the branding iron rested, where Tommy would see it every morning, where it belonged. He stood there looking at it as the last light came through the barn doors. Dust motes floated in the gold. Cattle shifted in their stalls. The smell of hay and spring and continuity filled the space. The ranch had survived drought and blizzards and market crashes and thieves who smiled while they stole. It had survived because the Caldwells knew one thing Jake never learned. Land isn't something you take, it's something you serve. Roy locked the barn, walked to the house where lights were on, and Tommy was probably drawing another picture of their future. The stars were coming out, the mountains were dark against a sky that still held some light. He thought about Linda, wherever she was, about Jake and his lawyer and the fraud charges that would play out however they played out. About 30 ranchers who'd stood witness to the truth when it mattered, and he thought about tomorrow's 5 a.m. fence check. About teaching Tommy to rope, about calves growing and grass greening and the endless work of keeping what 3 generations had built. The ranch would survive this too, because that's what it was built to do. 3 weeks later, Roy woke at 4:30 like he'd been doing for 40 years, made coffee in the dark, the smell filled the kitchen, wood smoke and morning and the promise that today would be like yesterday and the day after would be like today. There was comfort in that, in knowing what came next. By 5, he was walking fence line. Tommy beside him now more mornings than not, The boy was learning to see what needed fixing before it broke, learning to read weather in the sky and cattle in their movement, learning the language of land that his great-grandfather had spoken first. Meadowlarks were singing, the grass was thick and green, calves ran in the pasture, their brands healed clean, the Caldwell mark that had been pressed into cattle hides for 60 years now would be for 60 more if Tommy learned what mattered. "Dad," Tommy said, checking a fence post the way Roy had taught him. "Think Mom's ever coming back?" "Don't know, son." "You miss her?" Roy thought about that, about truth and lies and the difference between missing someone and missing who you thought they were. "I miss a lot of things," he said finally, "but missing doesn't change what is." They finished the fence check as the sun came up proper, warming their shoulders, burning off the last of the cold. Back at the house, Roy poured coffee and they sat on the porch. No words, just morning sounds, birds and cattle and distance. His grandfather used to say the land remembers who loves it and who's using it. Roy believed that now in a way he hadn't before. The ranch had survived because the Caldwells had never tried to take from it more than they gave back, had never treated it as something to own instead of something to serve. Tommy asked when he could try the branding iron. Roy said this spring, when the calves came. The boy smiled, went back to his cereal with syrup on his cheek and plans in his eyes. Roy looked out across 3 generations of work, green pastures and strong fences and cattle that knew their home. Some battles you won by not losing yourself, some victories came quiet as dawn. The ranch had survived worse than Jake and Linda. It would survive this, it would survive because that's what it was built to do, and because there was still a Caldwell willing to wake at 4:30 and walk fence line and teach a boy that legacy wasn't something you inherited. It was something you earned every single morning. The coffee was hot, the sun was warm. Spring had come despite everything. That was enough.